The Ural Mountains, February 1959. A search party moves across the snow, scanning the white horizon for any sign of 9 missing hikers. For days, they've found nothing. Just wind, just silence, just the kind of cold that makes the air itself feel like glass. Then someone spots it. A tent, half collapsed, buried under snow. The searchers approach, expecting to find the group inside, maybe injured, maybe sheltering from the storm. But the tent is empty, and it's been cut open from the inside. Inside, everything is still laid out neatly. Boots, jackets, backpacks, a plate of food, half-eaten. As if whatever made 9 experienced hikers flee into the darkness happened so fast, so suddenly, that grabbing a coat wasn't even an option. The temperature that night had dropped to -30°C. And yet those 9 people ran out into it, some barefoot, some in only underwear, into the frozen dark. What made them do that? 67 years later, we still don't have a complete answer for what happened on that mountain. But the evidence that investigators uncovered in the weeks and months that followed would only make the mystery deeper. Because what they found wasn't just a hiking accident. It was a scene so strange, so contradictory, that some people still believe the truth was deliberately hidden. Tonight, we're walking through every piece of this case, the timeline, the autopsies, the theories, and the one 2021 discovery that may finally explain what really happened at Dyatlov Pass. To understand what was lost on that mountain, you first need to know who was on it. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, a radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute. He was described by everyone who knew him as meticulous, capable, the kind of person who planned for everything. This expedition was his project, his responsibility. With him were 8 others. Most were students at the same institute: Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonyshenko, Zenaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Alexander Kolovatov, Lyudmila Dubinina, Nikolai Thibault Brignol. The oldest member was Semyon Zolotaryov, a 38-year-old sports instructor who joined the group as an experienced guide. There was supposed to be a 10th hiker. His name was Yuri Yudin. On January 28th, a few days into the trek, he started experiencing severe joint pain, sciatica. The group made the decision that he should turn back. Yudin said goodbye to his friends at a remote train station. He would be the only survivor. Think about that for a moment. A bad back saved his life. The goal of the expedition was ambitious. They planned to cover roughly 300 kilometers of the northern Urals on skis, reaching a remote peak known as Mount Otter 10. This was a Category 3 expedition, the highest difficulty rating in the Soviet system at the time. These weren't amateurs. Every single one of them was an experienced winter hiker. They knew this terrain. They knew the risks. But knowing the risks and surviving them are not the same thing. The group left the city of Sverdlovsk, today's Yekaterinburg, on January 23, 1959. They traveled by train, then by truck, then on foot into increasingly remote territory. For the first week, everything went according to plan. Their diaries and cameras, later recovered from the campsite, show a group in good spirits, joking, taking photographs, making camp each night without incident. On January 31st, they reached the edge of the highlands. They cached some food and equipment in a wooded valley, planning to retrieve it on the return journey. The next day, February 1st, they began ascending toward the pass. This is where the plan started to unravel. Weather conditions deteriorated rapidly. Snowstorms, strong winds, visibility dropping to almost nothing. The group drifted off course, heading west toward the summit of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. The name, in the local Mansi language, translates to something ominous: Dead Mountain. By late afternoon, they'd realized their mistake. They were on the wrong mountain. They should have descended to the tree line where the forest would offer shelter. But Igor Dyatlov made a decision. They would camp right there on the exposed slope rather than lose the altitude they'd gained. It wasn't an unreasonable choice. These were experienced hikers, but it was the last choice they would ever make. Forensic analysis later estimated that the fatal event occurred sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. on February 2nd. Something happened at the campsite that made 9 people cut their way out of their own tent and run into the darkness. When the group didn't return by their expected date of February 12th, there was no immediate alarm. Delays were common in these expeditions, but by February 20th, families were demanding action. Search parties were dispatched. Military aircraft joined the effort. On February 26th, 25 days after the incident, they found the tent, and then they found the bodies. The bodies were found in 3 separate locations, and each location told a different part of the story. The first 2 were discovered at the edge of the forest, about 1.5 kilometers from the tent, near the remains of a small fire. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonyshenko. Both were dressed only in their underwear. Both had died of hypothermia. The branches of the pine tree above them had been broken up to 5 meters high, as though someone had climbed up, desperately trying to see the campsite, or perhaps to signal for help. Krivonyshenko's body had something unusual, a piece of flesh missing from his hand, bite marks, his own. In the final stages of hypothermia, he had apparently bitten into his own knuckle. Between the pine tree and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies spread across the slope. Igor Dyatlov himself, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin. All 3 had died of hypothermia, and their positions, frozen mid-stride, suggested they had been trying to crawl back up toward the tent when they collapsed. That's 5 bodies. 4 were still missing. It took searchers more than 2 months to find them. In May, when the snow finally began to melt, a local Mansi hunter discovered what appeared to be a snow den, a shelter the hikers had tried to dig, in a ravine deeper in the woods. Beneath 4 meters of snow, the final 4 bodies were recovered. This is where the story stops making any kind of simple sense. The first 5 victims had died of hypothermia, tragic but straightforward. The final 4 were different. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had suffered a skull fracture so severe that fragments of bone were found inside his brain. The medical examiner compared the force required to that of a car crash. Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina both had massive chest trauma, multiple ribs broken, internal bleeding. The force that crushed their chests was described as being equivalent to being hit by a truck. But here's the strange part. There were no external wounds to match the internal damage, no bruising on the skin, no cuts, as if the pressure had somehow bypassed the surface of their bodies entirely. And then there were the details that have fueled decades of speculation. Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes were gone. Zolotaryov was also missing his eyes. Alexander Kolovatov was missing his eyebrows. Soft tissue damage to the face, but only on those 3 bodies, the ones found in the ravine. The official Soviet investigation noted something else. Several items of clothing recovered from the bodies showed traces of radioactive contamination, small amounts, but measurable. And then there were eyewitness reports. Other hikers in the region, a separate expedition, camped roughly 50 kilometers south, reported seeing strange orange orbs in the sky that same night, floating, descending, silent. The Soviet investigation lasted 3 months. Their final conclusion was as vague as it was unsettling. The hikers had died, they said, due to a compelling natural force. No further explanation. The case was closed. The area was sealed off for 3 years. The families were told to stop asking questions. Over the decades, the theories have multiplied. Let's walk through them. The avalanche theory, the simplest explanation. A wall of snow hit the tent, forcing the hikers to cut their way out and flee. But there are problems. The slope where the tent was pitched wasn't steep enough for a traditional avalanche, roughly 23 degrees below the usual threshold. Search teams found no avalanche debris, and the tent, though collapsed, was still partially standing when found 26 days later. An avalanche should have buried it completely. The katabatic wind theory. Some researchers propose that extreme downslope winds that can exceed hurricane force, created infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below the range of human hearing. Infrasound has been shown in lab studies to cause disorientation, panic, even a primal sense of dread. The theory goes that the wind triggered a panic that made the hikers flee irrationally, but it doesn't explain the traumatic injuries. The military test theory. This one gained traction because of the radiation. In the late 1950s, the Soviet military was conducting tests in remote regions, including the Urals. Some believe a missile or weapon test went wrong, or that the hikers accidentally wandered into a testing zone. The orange orbs, according to this theory, were not UFOs, but military flares or test detonations. The radiation came from fallout. The crushing injuries came from a blast wave. It fits several pieces of evidence, but there's a problem. No military documentation has ever surfaced to confirm a test in that exact location at that exact time. And the Soviet Union was not exactly shy about conducting tests in remote areas. Why cover this one up so aggressively? The infrasound-induced panic theory, popularized by author Donnie Eichar in his book Dead Mountain. This theory suggests that the unique shape of Kholat Syakhl created a vortex of wind that generated infrasound directly above the tent. The hikers were hit with a wave of inexplicable terror, their brains reacting to a frequency they couldn't consciously hear. They fled in panic. The injuries came later from falls and exposure. This theory elegantly explains why 9 experienced hikers would abandon their tents so suddenly. But critics point out that infrasound doesn't typically cause the kind of massive internal trauma found in the ravine victims. The Yeti theory. Yes, some people genuinely believe this. One of the more fringe explanations suggests the group was attacked by a large, unknown creature. The missing tongue and eyes would be consistent with scavenging, but scavenging by animals after death, not during an attack. None of these theories could check every box. The avalanche made sense of the flight, but not the injuries. The military test made sense of the injuries, but lacked evidence. The infrasound explained the panic, but not the crushed ribs. For more than 60 years, the Dyatlov Pass incident remained a puzzle with too many pieces and no picture. Then, in 2021, something changed. In January 2021, 2 researchers, Johann Gaume from ETH Zurich and Alexander Puzrin from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, published a study in the scientific journal Nature. They had used computer models to recreate the conditions at Dyatlov Pass on the night of February 1st, 1959. What they found was a mechanism nobody had fully pieced together before. It wasn't a traditional avalanche. Those require steep slopes and large snow volumes. But there is another kind of avalanche, a slab avalanche, that can occur on much gentler terrain under specific conditions. And those specific conditions they discovered were all present at the Dyatlov campsite. Here's what their model showed. The tent was pitched on a slope that appeared mild, roughly 23 degrees. But beneath the surface, snow was a layer of depth hoar, weak granular crystals with very low friction. And directly above the tent, the ground was actually steeper than it appeared, up to 28 degrees on the buried layer. Then there was the cut. To set up their tent, the hikers had dug into the snow slope, effectively creating a flat platform. That cut, the researchers found, weakened the snowpack above it. And then there was the wind. That night, strong katabatic winds that flowed downhill, were driving snow over the shoulder of the mountain and depositing it directly above the tent. Hour by hour, the load was increasing. The model showed that after roughly 7 to 13 hours of wind-driven snow accumulation, the slab directly above the tent became unstable. A relatively small slab, perhaps only a few meters across, would have released and slid down onto the campsite. This is the key insight. A slab avalanche of this type wouldn't have buried the tent in a massive cascade. It would have been small enough to partially collapse the tent, terrifying the hikers inside and convincing them they were about to be buried in a much larger slide. They cut their way out. They ran, but the slab also had enough force to explain the injuries. The researchers demonstrated that even a relatively small slab, a block of dense, compacted snow, could cause the kind of chest and skull trauma found in the autopsies if the victims were pinned against hard objects on the ground. The ravine victims had been in the snow den when it collapsed on top of them. The missing eyes and tongue? Post-mortem scavenging. Small animals drawn to soft tissue. The radiation? 2 of the hikers had worked at or lived near the Kishtim nuclear facility, which had experienced contamination years earlier. The orange orbs, possibly military flares, unrelated to the deaths, but reported in the same region that same night. The slab avalanche theory doesn't answer every single question, but it answers more than any theory before it. So after more than 6 decades, after autopsies and investigations and accusations and cover-ups and computer models and scientific papers, what really happened at Dyatlov Pass? The most likely answer, supported by the best evidence we currently have, is this. 9 experienced hikers made camp in the wrong place at the wrong time. The wind loaded snow onto a weak layer above them. A slab released. They panicked, rationally, and ran. Some died trying to get back to the tent. Others made it to the forest but couldn't survive the cold. And the strange injuries, the details that have fueled so many conspiracy theories, came from a combination of traumatic impact, post-mortem scavenging, and coincidental contamination. It's not as cinematic as a Soviet cover-up. It's not as chilling as infrasound-induced hysteria. But it's the truth, or the closest thing we have to it. And yet, there's something about the Dyatlov Pass incident that stays with you even after you've heard the scientific explanation. Because at the heart of this story, beneath all the theories and the forensic reports and the computer models, is something profoundly human. 9 people in the dark. A tent they couldn't stay in. A forest they couldn't reach. A cold so absolute it turned their own bodies against them. And in those final hours, evidence suggests they didn't give up. They started a fire. They dug a shelter. They tried to crawl back to their supplies. Dyalov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin all died, facing uphill, still fighting to return to their friends. The slab avalanche explains the physics. It doesn't diminish the people. The pass where they died now bears Igor Dyatlov's name. The mountain itself, Kholat Syakhl, still stands silent over the Urals, keeping whatever other secrets it might hold beneath the snow. And somewhere in the archives of Russia, the case file remains technically open. A mystery solved enough for science, perhaps, but not yet fully at rest for the rest of us.